The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as 12-year-old Emma Morrison stood frozen beside her father. The royal procession was minutes away and everything felt wrong. Her father's grip on her shoulder was too tight, his breathing too quick, his smile too forced. This wasn't the loving parent who had tucked her into bed the night before. Something had changed overnight, and Emma could feel danger pulsing through the air like electricity before a storm. The crowd around them buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of people had gathered along the palace route, waving small flags and clutching cameras, hoping for a glimpse of the young prince who would be passing through on his way to the coronation ceremony. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, elderly couples held hands, and vendors sold commemorative souvenirs. It should have been a day of celebration. Instead, Emma's stomach twisted with fear she couldn't name. Her father had been acting strange for weeks. Late-night phone calls conducted in hushed whispers. Unexplained absences, money appearing in their modest apartment that didn't match his factory worker's salary. Her mother had left them 3 years ago, and since then it had been just Emma and her dad against the world. But now she barely recognized the man beside her. His eyes darted constantly, scanning the crowd with an intensity that made her skin crawl. That morning, he had insisted she wear her best dress, the blue one with white flowers that she usually saved for church. He had brushed her long brown hair himself, something he rarely did, and his hands had trembled the entire time. When she asked why they were going to see the royal procession, when they had never cared about such things before, he had simply said it was important. His voice had been hollow, empty of the warmth she had always known. Now standing in the crowd, Emma noticed the bulge beneath his jacket. She had seen it when he reached up to wave at someone across the street. Her father didn't own anything that would create such a shape. The realization hit her like ice water. Whatever was hidden there didn't belong in this joyful crowd. It didn't belong anywhere near the young prince whose face smiled from every newspaper and television screen. The royal guard began to appear, their red uniforms pristine, their faces stern and professional. They moved with practiced precision, scanning the crowd with trained eyes. Among them, one guard stood out. He was younger than the others, perhaps in his mid-20s, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His nameplate read, Officer James Chen. While the other guards looked straight ahead or swept their gazes across sections of the crowd, Officer Chen's attention seemed to linger on individuals reading body language, searching for anomalies. Emma's father stiffened as the guards approached their section. His hand moved slightly toward his jacket, and Emma felt her heart begin to race. She didn't understand everything that was happening, but she understood enough. Her father was planning something terrible. The man who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had made her chocolate milk when she couldn't sleep, who had cried with her when her mother left, was about to do something that could never be undone. She thought about the prince who was only 15 years old. She had read about him in her school's weekly news assignment. He loved soccer and was learning 4 languages. He volunteered at children's hospitals. He was someone's son, just as she was someone's daughter. Whatever anger or desperation had consumed her father, that young prince didn't deserve to pay for it. Officer Chen was now directly across from them, about 20 feet away. His eyes swept across the crowd, professional and alert. Emma knew she had seconds, maybe less. Her father's hand was now inside his jacket. She could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. The crowd around them was oblivious, cheering as the procession drew nearer, the sound of trumpets announcing the prince's approach. Emma's mind raced. If she screamed, chaos would erupt, and in that chaos anything could happen. If she grabbed her father's arm, he might react violently. She needed to communicate danger without creating panic. She needed to signal one person, the one person who might understand and act quickly enough to prevent disaster. Officer Chen's gaze passed over her, beginning to move on to the next section of crowd. Emma knew this was her only chance. She raised her hand to her face, covering her mouth as if coughing. But instead of coughing, she formed a specific gesture. Her thumb was tucked into her palm, the 4 fingers wrapped around it, creating a closed fist. Then she lowered her hand to her chest briefly before dropping it to her side. She had learned this signal just 2 weeks ago during a school assembly. A police officer had visited to teach them about safety, and among the many things discussed was a hand signal for silent help. It was designed for people who were in danger but couldn't speak. The officer had made them practice it, saying it could save lives. Emma had never imagined she would actually use it. For a moment, Officer Chen seemed to continue his scan of the crowd. Emma's heart sank. He hadn't seen it. He hadn't understood. But then, so subtly that no one else would notice, his eyes snapped back to her. Their gazes locked. She saw recognition flash across his face, followed immediately by a sharp, assessing intelligence. He glanced at her father, then back to her, and in that fraction of a second, Emma saw him make a decision. Officer Chen didn't reach for his radio. He didn't call out to his fellow guards. He didn't do any of the things that would have been protocol in such a situation. Instead, he smiled warmly, as if greeting an old friend, and began walking directly toward them. His demeanor was casual, friendly, completely at odds with the tension Emma knew he must be feeling. Her father noticed the approaching guard, and his whole body went rigid. His hand, still inside his jacket, tightened around whatever he was holding. Emma could feel the muscles in his arm tensing, preparing. Officer Chen was now just 10 feet away, still smiling, seemingly unaware of any danger. The crowd pressed in around them, and the sound of the approaching procession grew louder. Emma stood between her father and the guard, a 12-year-old girl who had just set something irreversible into motion. She didn't know if Officer Chen had a plan or if she had just made everything worse. All she knew was that in a few seconds everything would change, and there would be no going back. Officer Chen was 5 feet away now, close enough that Emma could see the determination behind his casual smile, close enough that her father could strike if he chose to. The moment stretched out, suspended in time, balanced on a knife's edge between disaster and salvation. Officer Chen closed the final distance between himself and Emma with 3 easy strides, his smile never wavering. To anyone watching, he appeared to be simply greeting a family in the crowd, perhaps offering them a better view or making friendly conversation. But his eyes told a different story. They were sharp, calculating, taking in every detail of the scene before him. When he reached them, he did something completely unexpected. He bent down slightly, bringing himself to Emma's eye level, and spoke in a warm, jovial tone that carried just far enough for her father to hear. His words were casual, but Emma caught the underlying steel in his voice as he said them. "Hello there, young lady. What a beautiful dress you're wearing today. You know, my daughter has one almost exactly like it. She's about your age, too." He glanced up at Emma's father with what appeared to be a friendly father-to-father acknowledgement. "They grow up so fast, don't they, sir?" Emma's father stood frozen, his hand still concealed in his jacket. Sweat now ran freely down his temples. Officer Chen's positioning had been deliberate. By kneeling and speaking to Emma, he had placed himself between the crowd and her father, blocking any clear line of action. More importantly, he had forced Emma's father into a social interaction that would appear suspicious if he refused to engage. Yes, they do," her father managed, his voice strained. His eyes flickered between Officer Chen and the approaching procession. The trumpets were louder now. The prince's carriage would be passing by within minutes. Officer Chen stood up slowly, maintaining his relaxed demeanor. "You know, I've been standing on my feet all morning and I just realized something. This section of the crowd has the absolute worst view of the procession." He gestured toward the tall barriers in the angle of the street. "The prince's carriage is going to be completely blocked by that vendor's cart." This was a lie. Their position actually offered one of the clearest views of the route, which was precisely why Emma's father had chosen it. But Officer Chen delivered the statement with such casual authority that several people nearby actually craned their necks, suddenly doubting their own chosen spots. "There's a much better location just up there," Officer Chen continued, pointing toward a section further back and to the left. "Less crowded, too. Why don't you folks come with me? I'll make sure you get a prime spot. It's the least I can do for such a nice family." It wasn't a request. Despite the friendly packaging, both Emma and her father understood it was a command. Officer Chen was separating them from the crowd, moving them away from the procession route. Emma's father had 2 choices: comply and maintain the appearance of an innocent spectator, or refuse and immediately mark himself as suspicious. For several agonizing seconds, Emma's father didn't move. His jaw clenched and his eyes held a wild, desperate look. Emma could almost see his mind racing, calculating odds, considering his options. The hand in his jacket shifted slightly. Officer Chen noticed, and though his smile never faltered, his body tensed imperceptibly. weight shifting to the balls of his feet, ready to react. Then, as if a string had been cut, her father's shoulders sagged slightly. "That's very kind of you, officer," he said, the words coming out hollow and defeated. His hand slowly withdrew from his jacket, empty, and hung at his side. Officer Chen nodded pleasantly. "Wonderful. Follow me then." He placed a gentle but firm hand on Emma's shoulder, positioning himself between her and her father as they began moving through the crowd. To observers, it looked like a helpful guard escorting a family to a better viewing spot. In reality, it was a carefully controlled extraction. As they walked, Officer Chen spoke into his radio with practiced casualness, his voice too low for Emma's father to hear over the crowd noise. "Control, this is Chen. I'm relocating a family from Sector 7 to Sector 12. Running a standard proximity check. Nothing urgent." The words sounded routine, but Emma noticed how he emphasized certain phrases. It was code. He was calling for backup without alarming anyone. They moved away from the main route, weaving through excited spectators who barely noticed them. Emma's father followed mechanically, all the earlier tension drained from his body, replaced by a hollow numbness. Emma wanted to look at him, to understand what had driven him to this point, but fear kept her eyes forward. Officer Chen led them to a relatively empty area behind a refreshment stand, away from the main crowd, but still within sight of other guards. Within moments, 2 other officers appeared, seeming to materialize from nowhere. They wore plain clothes rather than the ceremonial uniforms, and their practiced efficiency suggested they were part of a tactical unit. "Hey, Chen, thought you could use some company," one of them said casually, but his eyes were hard and alert, immediately assessing the situation. The other officer positioned himself on the opposite side of Emma's father, boxing him in without making it obvious. Officer Chen's demeanor remained friendly as he turned to Emma's father. "Sir, I'm going to need to have a quick chat with you. Nothing to worry about, just routine security protocol. We're checking a few people in the crowd today, completely random." His tone was light, but the 2 plainclothes officers moved closer, their intentions clear. Emma's father closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they were filled with tears. "She doesn't know," he whispered, looking at Emma for the first time since they'd left their spot. "Please, she doesn't know anything about this. She's innocent." Officer Chen's expression shifted, the casual mask falling away to reveal genuine compassion mixed with professional gravity. "I understand, sir. We're going to take care of her. But right now, I need you to very slowly and carefully show me what's in your jacket." The crowd noise seemed to fade away as Emma watched her father reach into his jacket with shaking hands. He pulled out a small, dark object. Even Emma, with her limited understanding of such things, recognized it as a gun. The reality of what had almost happened, what she had helped prevent, crashed over her like a wave. Her knees went weak and one of the plainclothes officers gently steadied her, guiding her to sit on a nearby crate. Officer Chen took the weapon with practiced care, securing it quickly. The other officers moved in smoothly, handcuffing Emma's father with efficient movements that drew no attention from the distant crowd. Through it all, Officer Chen kept himself between Emma and the scene, shielding her from the worst of it. "James Morrison, you're being detained for questioning regarding a potential threat to the royal family," one of the plainclothes officers stated quietly. "You have the right to remain silent." Emma's father wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on his daughter, filled with anguish and regret. "I'm sorry, Emma, I'm so sorry. They said they'd hurt you if I didn't. I thought I could protect you this way. I thought—" His voice broke and he couldn't continue. Emma felt tears streaming down her face, but she couldn't speak. The man being led away was her father, but he was also a stranger. How long had he been living with this terrible burden? Why hadn't he told her? Why hadn't he gone to the police? Officer Chen crouched down beside her again, his voice gentle. "You did an incredibly brave thing today, Emma. You saved lives. Do you understand that? The prince, your father, maybe even yourself. What you did took remarkable courage." Through her tears, Emma managed to ask the question that burned in her mind. "What's going to happen to him?" Officer Chen looked at Emma with eyes that held both sadness and understanding. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully, weighing how much truth a 12-year-old could handle against how much she deserved to know. Before he could answer, another officer approached, this one wearing the insignia of a senior commander. She was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and an air of quiet authority. "I'll take it from here, Chen," she said, her voice kind but firm. She knelt beside Emma, introducing herself as Commander Patricia Walsh. "Your father is going somewhere safe right now, where doctors and other people can talk to him and help us understand what happened. You're not going to see him for a little while, but I promise you we're going to figure this all out." Emma wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Is he a bad person?" The question came out small and broken, carrying the weight of a child's world collapsing. Commander Walsh took Emma's hands in her own. "I don't believe people are simply good or bad, Emma. Sometimes good people get caught in terrible situations and they make choices they never thought they would make. That doesn't erase who they were before, but it doesn't excuse what they almost did either. The truth is usually complicated." In the distance, the royal procession passed by, completely unaware of the tragedy that had been narrowly averted. The crowd cheered as the prince's carriage rolled past, the young royal waving to his people with a warm smile. Emma watched through blurred vision, realizing that if not for her signal, that smiling boy might be dead right now. The thought made her stomach turn. Officer Chen had stepped away to brief other security personnel, but he kept glancing back at Emma, concern evident on his face. Commander Walsh noticed and called him over. "Chen, why don't you stay with Miss Morrison while I coordinate with the investigation team? I think she could use a familiar face." As Commander Walsh left to handle the growing security response, Officer Chen sat down on the crate beside Emma. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of celebration drifted over from the procession route, a surreal counterpoint to the gravity of what had just occurred. Finally, Emma found her voice. "How did you know? How did you understand what I was trying to say?" Officer Chen smiled slightly. "About 6 months ago, we had a briefing about new communication signals for people in distress. The hand signal you used has been spreading on social media, being taught in schools and community centers. It's designed for situations where someone needs help but can't speak openly. When I saw you make that gesture, my training kicked in immediately. But you walked over like nothing was wrong. Weren't you scared?" "Terrified," Officer Chen admitted, surprising Emma with his honesty. "But I knew that if I came in aggressively, if I called for backup loudly or drew my weapon, your father might have panicked. People in desperate situations can be unpredictable. I had to de-escalate, make him feel like he had options, convince him that compliance was his best choice. You broke the rules, though. You didn't call it in right away. You just walked over by yourself." Officer Chen was quiet for a moment, and Emma saw conflict play across his face. "You're right. Protocol says I should have immediately radioed for tactical support and maintained my position. What I did was risky, and I'll probably face questions about my decision. But sometimes protocol doesn't account for every situation. I saw a frightened girl sending a desperate signal, and I saw a man who looked like he was about to make a terrible mistake. I made a judgment call." Before Emma could respond, Commander Walsh returned with a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Detective Sarah Martinez from the Metropolitan Police. She had a kind face but serious eyes that seemed to see everything. "Emma, I know this is a difficult time, but I need to ask you some questions about your father. Anything you can tell us might help us understand what led to today." Over the next hour, sitting in a security office away from the celebrations, Emma told them everything. The late-night phone calls, the unexplained money, her father's increasing paranoia and strange behavior. The detective listened carefully, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Officer Chen remained in the room, a steady presence that helped Emma feel safe enough to speak honestly. As Emma talked, pieces of a larger picture began emerging. Detective Martinez made several phone calls, and with each one, her expression grew more grave. When she finally set down her phone, she looked at Commander Walsh and Officer Chen with troubled eyes. "We need to expand this investigation immediately," she said. "Based on what Emma has told us and what we found on James Morrison, this wasn't a lone actor scenario. He was coerced. Someone was threatening his daughter to force his compliance." Emma's blood ran cold. "Someone wanted to hurt me?" Detective Martinez chose her words carefully. "Your father received messages over the past month. They contained photos of you, Emma. Photos taken outside your school, near your home, at places you frequent. The messages made it clear that if he didn't cooperate, you would be harmed." The room spun. Emma felt Officer Chen's steadying hand on her shoulder as she processed this information. Her father hadn't been planning violence out of hatred or madness. He had been trying to protect her, trapped in an impossible situation where every choice led to horror. "Why?" Emma whispered. "Why would someone want to hurt the prince? What did they want my dad to do?" Commander Walsh exchanged glances with Detective Martinez. "That's what we need to find out. Your father is being questioned now, and we're already working on tracing the people who coerced him. But Emma, this means you might be in danger too. The people who threatened your father, they're still out there, and they know their plan failed." The celebration outside had reached its peak, with music and cheers filling the air. Inside the security office, however, a different kind of operation was ramping up. Officers and detectives moved with purposeful urgency. Phones rang constantly, and computer screens displayed photos and documents being analyzed in real time. Officer Chen noticed Emma's growing anxiety. "Hey, look at me," he said gently. "You're going to be okay. We're not going to let anything happen to you. You're under police protection now, and we're going to keep you safe while we figure this all out. But what about my dad? Is he going to prison?" Detective Martinez sat down across from Emma. "That's going to depend on a lot of factors. The fact that he was coerced, that he was trying to protect you, those things matter. But he also came very close to committing a serious crime. The courts will have to decide what's just. I can't make you promises about outcomes, but I can promise you that we'll make sure everyone understands the full context of what happened." A young officer knocked on the door frame. "Detective Martinez, we've got something from Morrison's interrogation. You need to hear this." The detective stood, then looked back at Emma. "I'll be right back. Chen, stay with her, please." After she left, Emma looked up at Officer Chen. "I think I ruined my father's life." "No," Officer Chen said firmly. "You saved it. And probably your own too. If your father had gone through with what he was planning, he would likely be dead right now. Security would have stopped him, and in the chaos people could have been hurt or killed, including him. By stopping him before he acted, you gave him a chance to explain, to seek help, maybe eventually to rebuild. That wouldn't have been possible otherwise." Emma wanted to believe him, but the weight of everything felt crushing. She was 12 years old, and in the space of an hour her entire world had shattered. Her father was in custody, possibly part of some larger conspiracy. She had no other family, no mother to call, nowhere to go. The reality of her situation began to sink in, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Detective Martinez returned to the room with an expression that mixed anger and concern. She pulled up a chair and sat down directly in front of Emma, her body language suggesting she was about to share something important. "Emma, your father has been very cooperative. He's told us everything, and what he's revealed is bigger than we initially thought." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "There's an organization, a group that's been operating in the shadows for years. They're opposed to the royal family, believe the monarchy should be abolished. Most of their activities have been peaceful protests and political campaigns, but recently, a radical faction within the group decided that wasn't enough." Commander Walsh entered the room as well, holding a tablet that displayed photos and documents. "They've been recruiting vulnerable people, folks with financial troubles, family issues, anyone desperate enough to be manipulated. Your father lost his job 3 months ago. Did you know that?" Emma shook her head, stunned. "He still left for work every morning. He said everything was fine." "He was too proud to tell you," Detective Martinez said gently. "He'd been taking odd jobs, trying to keep up appearances, but the bills were piling up. That's when they approached him. They offered money, enough to solve all his financial problems. In exchange, they just wanted some information about factory security systems where he used to work. They were testing him," Commander Walsh continued, "seeing if he'd cooperate on small things before they asked for bigger ones. Once he'd taken their money, they had leverage. They gradually increased their demands until finally, they showed him those photos of you and gave him an ultimatum." Emma tried to process this cascade of information. Her father, unemployed for months, struggling in silence while she remained oblivious. Then these people, these manipulators, had found his weak point and exploited it ruthlessly. What did they want him to do exactly? Detective Martinez glanced at Commander Walsh, who nodded slightly. They wanted him to create a distraction during the procession. The weapon they gave him wasn't actually functional. It was designed to look real but wouldn't fire. Their plan was for your father to brandish it, cause panic and chaos, and in that chaos, their real operative would make an actual attempt on the prince's life from a different location. The cruelty of the plan took Emma's breath away. Her father was meant to be a decoy, a distraction, someone who would draw all the security attention while the real attack happened elsewhere. And because he would have appeared to be the attacker, he likely would have been shot by security forces, eliminating him as a witness while traumatizing Emma beyond measure. They were going to kill him, Emma said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. They sent him there to die. Yes, Officer Chen said quietly. And they probably planned to silence you too, eventually. You were only useful to them as leverage while they needed your father. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Detective Martinez leaned forward. But here's the important part, Emma. Because you acted when you did, because Officer Chen intervened, we caught your father before he could even pull out the fake weapon. That means their real operative, whoever was supposed to make the actual attempt, had to abort. We've locked down the entire area, and we're reviewing security footage from every angle. We're going to find these people. Your father is providing us with everything he knows, Commander Walsh added. Description of the people he met with, phone numbers, locations of meetings, everything. He wants to make this right, Emma. He knows he can't undo what almost happened, but he's trying to help us stop these people from hurting anyone else. A victim services counselor arrived, a warm-faced woman named Mrs. Chen, who explained she would be helping Emma with immediate needs like temporary housing. But Emma barely heard her. Her mind was racing with questions, fears, and a growing sense of the magnitude of what had happened. Officer Chen noticed her distress and asked for a moment alone with her. After the adult stepped out, he spoke quietly. I know this is overwhelming. I know your world has been turned completely upside down, but I need you to hear something important. What you did today, that single gesture, that moment of courage, it didn't just save the prince, it saved your father too. You gave him a chance to come clean, to be honest. To work with us instead of dying as their pawn. That matters, Emma, that really matters. Will I ever see him again? Emma asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her chest. I think so, Officer Chen said carefully. It won't be the same, and it won't be for a while. There will be legal proceedings, and he'll have to answer for his actions. But the fact that he was coerced, that he never actually committed the violent act, and that he's cooperating fully, these things will be considered. He's not a monster, Emma. He's a good man who was put in an impossible situation and made bad choices trying to protect you. Over the next several days, Emma lived in a protective custody facility, a comfortable apartment-style residence with round-the-clock security. She was allowed supervised video calls with her father, conversations that were both heartbreaking and healing. He apologized repeatedly, explained his desperation and fear, and told her how proud he was of her bravery. The investigation moved quickly. Using the information her father provided along with security footage analysis and digital forensics, police identified 3 key members of the radical faction. 2 were arrested within 48 hours. The third, the person who would have been the actual assassin, had fled the country, but was tracked to an airport in a neighboring nation where they were detained. Detective Martinez kept Emma informed throughout the process, always explaining things in terms she could understand. She learned that the group had been operating for nearly 5 years, recruiting dozens of vulnerable individuals for various plots, most of which had been thwarted before reaching critical stages. Her father had been just one of many victims, though his case had come closest to actual tragedy. 2 weeks after the incident, Emma was asked to give formal testimony. The courtroom was smaller than she expected, and most of the proceedings were closed to the public due to her age and the sensitive nature of the case. Her father was there in different clothing than she was used to seeing him wear, looking thin and tired but somehow lighter, as if a terrible burden had been lifted. When it was time for Emma to speak, she told the truth simply and clearly. She described the morning of the procession, her father's strange behavior, her growing sense of danger, and her decision to signal Officer Chen. She talked about learning the hand gesture in school, never imagining she would actually use it. She spoke about her father's love for her, the difficult years after her mother left, and how she knew, even in that terrible moment, that something awful must have happened to make him act so out of character. Her testimony took less than an hour, but its impact was significant. The judge listened carefully, asking occasional questions that suggested genuine interest in understanding the full story. Emma's victim services counselor sat beside her the entire time, providing silent support. After her testimony, Emma was excused while the adults discussed legal matters beyond her understanding. Officer Chen met her in the hallway and surprised her by kneeling down and giving her a small box. Inside was a medal, unofficial but clearly meaningful. "This is from the guard unit," he said. "We had it made specially. It's for civilians who demonstrate extraordinary courage in protecting others. You're the youngest person to ever receive one." Emma looked at the medal, a simple silver disc with an engraved design of a shield and the words, "Courage in Service." She didn't feel courageous. She felt tired and sad and confused. But she accepted the medal because she understood it represented something bigger than her own feelings. It represented the lives saved, the tragedy averted, the difference one moment of bravery could make. The weeks following the trial blurred together into a strange new reality for Emma. She moved in with a foster family, the Hendersons, who lived in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of the city. They were kind people with 2 children of their own, and they tried their best to make Emma feel welcome. But everything felt wrong. The bed wasn't her bed. The sounds of the house were unfamiliar. The smell of Mrs. Henderson's cooking, while delicious, wasn't the smell of home. School was perhaps the hardest part. Emma had been enrolled in a new school under modified records to protect her identity. But somehow word had gotten out about her involvement in stopping the attack on the prince. Other children whispered and pointed. Some treated her like a hero, which made her uncomfortable. Others were frightened of her, as if her association with violence, even as someone who prevented it, made her dangerous. She ate lunch alone most days, preferring solitude to the complicated social dynamics her presence seemed to create. Officer Chen, now simply James to Emma as their relationship had evolved beyond the formal boundaries of that first meeting, visited regularly. He had become something of a mentor and friend, checking on her progress, bringing her books, and simply being present when she needed someone who understood what she had been through. The police department had conducted an inquiry into his decision to approach Emma's father alone, rather than following protocol, but ultimately commended his judgment. His actions had been unorthodox but effective, preventing potential casualties and diffusing a dangerous situation. "How are you settling in with the Hendersons?" James asked during one of his visits. They sat in a small park near her foster home, watching children play on swings and slides. "They're nice," Emma said, which was true but also incomplete. "It's just not home." James nodded, understanding what she didn't say. "I spoke with your father's attorney yesterday. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month. Given all the circumstances, the coercion, his cooperation, and the fact that no actual violence occurred, the attorney is hopeful for a reduced sentence. Maybe 5 to 7 years with possibility of parole after 3. 3 years felt like forever to a 12-year-old. Emma would be 15 when her father might be released, practically an adult. Everything would be different by then. She would be different. The thought made her chest ache. The attorney also mentioned something else, James continued. There's been discussion about restorative justice programs, opportunities for victims and offenders to meet, communicate, heal. It's not traditional, especially in a case like this, but your father has expressed interest if you eventually feel ready. Emma wasn't sure what she felt ready for. Some days she was angry at her father for not trusting her enough to tell her the truth about his job loss, for not going to the police when the threat started, for putting them both in such a terrible position. Other days she understood his desperation and felt overwhelming compassion for the impossible choice he'd faced. Both feelings were true, and learning to hold them simultaneously was exhausting. 2 months after the incident, something unexpected happened. Emma was reading in her room at the Henderson house when Mrs. Henderson called her downstairs, her voice carrying an unusual note of excitement and nervousness. In the living room stood a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, accompanied by 2 security personnel. "Miss Morrison." "I'm Lord Chancellor Davidson," the man said, his formal title seeming almost absurd in the Hendersons' modest living room, with its worn furniture and family photos on the wall. "I'm here on behalf of His Royal Highness Prince William." Emma's breath caught. She hadn't expected this, hadn't imagined that the royal family even knew her name beyond police reports and security briefings. Lord Chancellor Davidson continued. "The prince was informed about what happened on the day of his procession. He was deeply moved by your courage and wanted to express his gratitude personally. However, Given the sensitive nature of the situation and your age, a formal meeting would attract media attention that we felt would not be in your best interest. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, cream-colored and heavy, with an official seal. The prince asked me to deliver this to you personally. Emma took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a handwritten letter on royal stationery. The handwriting was neat and careful, clearly written with thought and intention. The letter read, "Dear Emma, I learned about what you did on the day of the procession, and I wanted to write to you myself. What you did took remarkable courage. You saved my life, but you also saved the lives of many others in that crowd, including your own father. I am 15 years old, only 3 years older than you, and I cannot imagine having to make the choice you made. They tell me you used a hand signal to call for help, that you found a way to communicate danger without words. That kind of quick thinking and bravery is rare in anyone, let alone someone your age. I want you to know that I understand your life has changed because of this day. I understand you made sacrifices, and that the aftermath has been difficult. Please know that your courage has not gone unnoticed or unappreciated. You have my deepest gratitude and my highest respect. If there is ever anything you need, anything at all, please do not hesitate to reach out through Lord Chancellor Davidson. You will always have a friend in the royal family. With sincere thanks and admiration, Prince William." Tears blurred Emma's vision as she read the letter a second time. Then a third. Mrs. Henderson had discreetly left the room to give her privacy, though the security personnel remained by the door. Lord Chancellor Davidson spoke gently. "The prince was also informed about your father's situation and the circumstances that led to that day. He asked me to convey that he bears no ill will toward your father and hopes that justice will be tempered with mercy. He understands that your father was a victim as well in his own way. This kindness, this understanding from the person her father had been forced to target, broke something open in Emma. She had been holding herself together through sheer will, processing trauma and grief and fear with a stoicism that wasn't natural for a child her age. But this letter, this gesture of compassion from someone who had every right to demand harsh justice, released something in her. She wept, not the quiet tears she had shed in private moments, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of pain she had been afraid to fully acknowledge. Lord Chancellor Davidson waited patiently, not uncomfortable with her emotion. When she finally composed herself enough to speak, she asked, "Can I write back to him?" "Of course," Lord Davidson said. "You can send letters through my office, and I'll ensure they reach the prince personally." After he left, Emma sat with the letter for a long time. She thought about the prince, a boy only slightly older than herself who lived in a world of privilege and protocol, but who had taken time to write personally to her. She thought about Officer James Chen, who had risked his career and possibly his life to help a frightened girl. She thought about Detective Martinez and Commander Walsh and all the people who had worked so hard to unravel the conspiracy and bring the perpetrators to justice. And she thought about her father, locked away but still trying to protect her, still trying to make amends. That evening, Emma began writing a response to the prince's letter. She wrote about her father, about the good man he had been before desperation had twisted his choices. She wrote about learning the hand signal in school, never imagining she would use it. She wrote about her hope that someday, something good could come from all this pain. Maybe other children would learn about being alert to danger. Maybe other families would learn to ask for help before desperation led them down dark paths. Maybe her story, as painful as it was, could prevent similar tragedies. 3 years passed with the strange quality of time that seems both impossibly slow and startlingly fast. Emma grew from a frightened 12-year-old into a more confident 15-year-old, though the journey was far from smooth. The Hendersons remained her foster family, and gradually their house did become a kind of home. Not the home she had known with her father, but a different place where she felt safe and valued. She learned to accept their affection without feeling disloyal to her father. She learned that love could expand to include new people without erasing the old. Her correspondence with Prince William continued throughout those years, an unlikely friendship conducted through carefully written letters that touched on both ordinary teenage concerns and profound questions about duty, choice, and consequence. The prince wrote about the pressure of his position, the weight of expectation, and his desire to use his privilege for good. Emma wrote about her struggles at school, her complicated feelings about her father, and her growing interest in psychology and helping others who had experienced trauma. James Chen remained a constant presence in her life. He had been promoted to sergeant and worked now in community outreach, teaching safety programs at schools throughout the city. Emma sometimes accompanied him, sharing her story when she felt ready, helping other children understand the importance of the hand signal and other ways to communicate when in danger. Standing in school gymnasiums full of children who looked at her with wide, attentive eyes, Emma found unexpected purpose. Her pain, her experience, could be transformed into protection for others. Her father's sentencing had indeed been more lenient than it might have been. 5 years, with eligibility for parole after 3. He had spent that time working prison jobs, attending counseling, and participating in every rehabilitation program available. His letters to Emma came regularly, filled with apologies and pride, regret and hope. Writing to him, visiting him during supervised sessions, Emma worked through her own complicated feelings about what he had done and why. The day of her father's parole hearing arrived when Emma was 15 years old. She sat in another courtroom, much like the one where she had testified 3 years earlier, but this time she was there to speak on his behalf. She had thought carefully about what she would say, working through her statement with her therapist, Mrs. Henderson and James, when called to speak. Emma stood before the parole board with a steadiness that would have been impossible 3 years earlier. "My father made a terrible mistake," she began, her voice clear and strong. "He was put in an impossible situation, and he made the wrong choice. But I want you to understand that before that day, he was a good father. He loved me, protected me, and taught me right from wrong. The people who manipulated him knew exactly what they were doing. They found a desperate man and exploited his love for his daughter." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I'm not asking you to forget what he did or to minimize how serious it was. What I'm asking is that you see the whole person, not just his worst moment. My father has spent 3 years taking responsibility, working to understand his choices and trying to become better. I've visited him, written to him, and I've seen that change. He's not the same frightened, desperate man who stood in that crowd. He's someone who has faced his darkest moment and chosen to grow from it." The parole board listened carefully, asking questions about her current relationship with her father, her living situation, and her own healing process. Emma answered honestly, acknowledging the difficulty while also expressing her belief that her father deserved a chance at redemption. 2 weeks later, the decision came. Parole was granted, with strict conditions including continued counseling, regular check-ins with a parole officer, and a gradual reintroduction to Emma's life under therapeutic supervision. He couldn't live with her immediately. The Hendersons would remain her guardians for now. But there would be supervised visits, phone calls, opportunities to slowly rebuild what had been broken. The first meeting happened in a neutral space, a counseling office with a therapist present. Emma's father looked older than she remembered, his hair graying at the temples, his face thinner. When he saw her, his eyes filled with tears. They sat across from each other, an ocean of hurt and healing between them. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "What I did, what I almost did, putting you in danger, putting others in danger, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." Emma looked at the man who had raised her, who had made her breakfast and helped with homework and tucked her in at night. She looked at the man who had kept his unemployment secret out of pride, who had been targeted by manipulators because of his vulnerability, who had faced an impossible choice and made the wrong one. Both versions were true. Both versions were her father. "I'm angry," Emma said honestly. "I'm still angry about a lot of things. Angry that you didn't trust me enough to tell me about losing your job. Angry that you didn't go to the police when they threatened me. Angry that you made choices that hurt us both." She took a breath. "But I'm also learning that people are more than their worst moments. I'm learning that healing is complicated and forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's work, and it takes time." Over the following months, they did that work. Supervised visits became regular occurrences. They talked about the past, working through pain with the help of skilled therapists. They also talked about the present and future, carefully building new patterns of communication and trust. Emma shared stories about school, about her friendship with Prince William conducted through letters, about her work with James helping teach other children about safety. Her father got a job in a warehouse, honest work that paid modestly. He lived in a small apartment and attended mandatory counseling sessions. He was rebuilding his life one day at a time, carrying the weight of what he had almost done while trying to become someone who could move forward. On Emma's 16th birthday, two significant things happened. First, she received a package from the royal household. Inside was a scholarship letter. Prince William, now 18 and taking on more royal duties, had established a foundation for youth affected by violence and trauma. Emma was offered a full scholarship to the university of her choice to study psychology, social work, or any related field. The letter accompanying the scholarship was handwritten as always. "You told me once that you wanted something good to come from what happened," the prince wrote. "You wanted your story to help others. This scholarship is my way of helping make that possible. You have a gift for understanding people, for seeing complexity and nuance in difficult situations. The world needs people like you, Emma. People who have faced darkness and chosen to become lights for others." The second significant thing was simpler, but perhaps more meaningful. Her father, with permission from her therapist and the Hendersons, came to a small birthday celebration at the foster home. It was the first time he had been included in a family gathering since before the incident. The moment was awkward and emotional, but it was also healing. He gave her a small wrapped gift, a silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. "I know I broke our family," he said softly as she opened it. "I know I can't put it back the way it was, but I want you to know that you'll always be my daughter, and I'll always love you. No matter how long it takes, no matter how hard the work is, I want to be part of your life in whatever way you're comfortable with." Emma put on the locket and felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness exactly, not forgetting, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance, the understanding that people and relationships could be broken and still have value, still have the possibility of healing even if the scars remained visible. That night, Emma wrote in her journal, a practice her therapist had encouraged. She wrote about the journey of the past 4 years, the girl who had stood in a crowd and made a split-second decision that changed everything. She wrote about learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear but action despite it. She wrote about discovering that healing wasn't linear, that some days were harder than others, that growth often hurt. She also wrote about hope. Hope that her father would continue his journey toward redemption. Hope that her own story could help prevent similar tragedies. Hope that the hand signal she had learned and used would save others as it had saved her. Hope that 16-year-old Emma could honor 12-year-old Emma's bravery by building a life dedicated to helping others. Years later, Emma would become a trauma counselor, specializing in families affected by coercion and violence. She would work with victims and perpetrators, helping both understand the complex dynamics of manipulation and control. She would teach workshops on recognizing danger signs and communication strategies. She would never forget that moment in the crowd, the fear in her father's eyes, the weight of the decision she made. Officer James Chen, by then a captain, would sometimes join her for speaking engagements. They would tell their story together, the girl who signaled and the guard who understood, emphasizing the importance of awareness, communication, and the courage to act when something feels wrong. The hand signal Emma used became more widely taught, saving countless lives in situations where spoken communication was impossible or dangerous. Her